The middle range theory, nursing theory, which is referred to in this presentation, is derived from several broader philosophical perspectives. The primary focus today is on emancipatory knowing through critical theory. As you can see from Falk-Rafael's model of critical caring theory, Watson's caring sciences, Nightingale's work, and feminist critical theories form the root of the theory. Hence, the model is illustrated by a tree. A brief description of the primary assumptions and constructs of the critical caring theory are based on the model are that the trunk is made up of the essential core elements which support the 5 branches or praxis. The core elements are the curative health promoting processes CPP1 and 2, and then critical caring as a way of being, knowing, and choosing. The roots, which stabilize it, make up Watson's and Nightingale's work along with feminist critical theories. The leaves and branches provide energy through photosynthesis, aka praxis. And these are the CPPS 3 through 7. I won't go into details regarding the praxis component here. The roots of the mid-range theory have been discussed in the previous slides. The underlying theory I will focus on today is critical theory with the associated emancipatory knowing component. As described by Chen, emancipatory knowing involves our capacity of awareness and of our ability to critically reflect on issues and problems which influence our environment and that of our patients, and associate which have become entrenched or the status quo and why they came to be that way. The fundamental assumptions of emancipatory knowing include concepts about knowledge and how it is never value neutral. It's always political and informed by its relationship to power. Language is developed to carry meanings of power, and the social oppression is not static but can be changed. Habermas and Freire were critical philosophers who have had a profound influence over nursing theories. Based on critical theory, Fontana outlined emancipatory research as it relates to nursing practice and proposes 7 concepts which should be present in any emancipatory approach. The critique concept is not accepting anything at face value. It's more intricate than problem solving, though. The context is where you recognize the social environmental influences on human beings, politics, and the emancipatory intent are related to making explicit your intentions to create change and then having the correct intentions doing it. Democratic structure dictates that the subject and the researcher are equal partners. Emancipatory approach always includes dialogue, which is what informs your analysis. Reflexivity is the conscious application of self-reflection. Remember that emancipatory approaches are rooted in critical theory. There have been many critical theorists, and as I said, Habermas has been a significant contributor to nursing theories. Critical theories have usually come about during political upheavals, and they've been controversial in many ways, including that they have an anti-positivist perspective. And they have evolved over time and emerged based on the context at that time. Marxism underlies many of them and has been interpreted in several different ways. Critical theorists develop their theories largely through critical dialogues. Many of those were through dialogue with famous theorists such as Kant, Hegel, Marx, and Freud, and several others. And sometimes they adopted this data they got from this, and sometimes not. Critical theorists were originally motivated by their desire to understand relationships in society and to transform it. And their vision was that the process should be interdisciplinary and that it would reveal the right questions to ask which would inform their theories. Sometimes critical theory's focus was art. The approach to critical theory development has I already covered in many areas in this presentation. The primary approach, though, is dialogue and the synthesis of many disciplines. Habermas says that critical theory must be simultaneously explanatory, practical, and normative. I believe that to use the approach of critical theory means to understand all of its concepts simultaneously and become them in practice and scholarship. Aside from that, the concepts are that critical approaches use both quantitative and qualitative methodologies, recognize that reality can never be truly conceptualized empirically. The researcher only exists through engaging in dialogue and is on an equal playing field with the subjects. You do not discover knowledge, you create it, and you must convey and believe that the status quo can be changed. Realize that change can be difficult due to the fact that many times problems become entrenched in society and resist change. The actions of humans are political and many times serve to sustain the unhealthy and entrenched social culture. If human activity is causing harm to others, then one must work to identify and explain the current reality, identify the actors involved and relationships to the system, and use creative, participatory strategies to create goals and create change. The intent is to free people from oppression and domination, to critique current ideologies and uncover power imbalances. And then also to ensure that the public has access to the knowledge which you've generated. Habermas also proposed that there were three types of knowledge generators. There's empirical analysis, which is, of course, hard science, data. Hermeneutic interpretation has to do with techniques to uncover practical knowledge and is generated through dialogue. Phenomenological exploration of lived experiences, for instance. Critiques of dominion is knowledge gained through using critical approaches, which includes, very simply put, self-reflection and results in freedom from oppression. It's more complicated than that. Ideally, the three should complement one another rather than competing. Critical theory is very comprehensive and amenable to many approaches to research and practice. And some even say that it could be broad enough to underlie the nursing discipline itself. It already underlies many disciplines, and its concepts correlate with many nursing theories, philosophies, and models. One of those theories I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation, critical caring theory, and emancipatory critical approaches are also mentioned in the Nursing Manifesto. Chin says that emancipatory theory can enhance the advanced practice through the essentials 1 through 7. The ways that critical theory contribute to the understanding and predicting outcomes is through emancipatory critique, asking questions, digging deeper, questioning everything. Systems thinking is considering the whole, recognizing patterns and making changes, and using transformative leadership, which facilitates and inspires transformation and quality. The emancipatory knowledge generation asks deep questions, inspires people, and strives to understand problems and gain valuable evidence for practice. It also links research to practice. Typical questions used in emancipatory approaches are things like who and who benefits, who's disadvantaged, whose motives, what are the motives, is this appropriate? What ideology is driving this? And what evidence is there? What is the quality and the context of the evidence? What are the consequences and the biases, any assumptions? Does this affect individual or community? And what are the patterns and what is sustaining the patterns? So my fictional example case study could be called The Lived Experience of Living in a Long-Term Care Facility, a Participative Emancipatory Study. My methods would then be the emancipatory approach using critical caring theory. So this list is a list that I've compiled as I've done research, which shows the many studies, some of the studies that have been done using the critical emancipatory approach. There are many of them, and this is not an exhaustive list. The methods are very versatile and include both qualitative and quantitative studies. Generating empirical data is difficult but not impossible, and there have been tools that have been developed. And most critical research involves qualitative studies through group processes or phenomenological interviewing, or also storytelling is one method. And then I've listed a couple of the empirical tools to measure outcomes. The example study that I'm going to use that has used the emancipatory critical theory is Caring as Emancipatory Nursing Praxis, the Theory of Relational Caring Complexity. Ray and Turkle's research spanned several decades, and it resulted in the development of a theory and measurement instruments. Their study included both quantitative and qualitative methods of data generation, and its aim was to identify and understand the patterns which emerge in a complex healthcare system. They proposed that the problem is that healthcare is becoming too medicalized and bureaucratized, and they called for nurses to engage in emancipatory nursing practice based on their findings. So Chen describes emancipatory critical approaches and the way that it can enhance advanced nursing practice, and that's through the first 7 of the graduate essentials. It can be used to evaluate practice and best evidence for practice, including the appraisal of technology, systems thinking, using the process to improve healthcare systems, using transformative leadership. Emancipatory approaches link research, theory, and practice. The emancipatory approach to practice proposes advocacy to identify the benefits, advantages, disadvantages, values, and motives for people. This approach positively influences collaborative endeavors, and because emancipatory approach is an upstream method, it helps the practitioner identify problems to prevent issues. Nursing is not alone in their endeavor to overcome social environmental obstacles. And critical emancipatory approaches can be used by many disciplines, which makes it very generalizable. So the primary strengths of the critical emancipatory approach are that it's comprehensive, it's flexible, it has the potential for enhancing advanced nursing practice. It's a way of being that promotes critical reflection and digging deeper to identify and solve issues. It appears to be congruent with nursing's philosophical concepts leading to emancipation, or it leads to emancipation. Its main weaknesses are that it doesn't belong only to nursing. It can be difficult to measure, and sometimes it's marginalized and only tolerated by some scholars. It's often misunderstood and misinterpreted because it is abstract. Also, some people believe that it's only useful in settings of oppression. And finally, the word critique or critical has many negative connotations to it. So how will I root my practice in critical emancipatory approaches? As I discussed earlier, it is a way of being and knowing. I particularly appreciate how it can link theory, research, and practice. I subscribe to the idea that knowledge is empty without doing something with it, which is connecting the epistemological and ontological dimensions of nursing. I may use critical emancipatory approach as a framework for scholarship and practice in the future. I particularly like the way that Falk-Rafael utilized Watson's caring theory and other foundational work combined with critical theories to inform her model. I felt that her inclusion of all the ways of knowing was exceptionally appropriate and necessary to complete the model. I think that an advanced practice nurse must incorporate all ways of knowing in order to create positive patient outcomes and also to obtain personal satisfaction with one's practice. And you might notice I included emancipatory knowing and socio-political knowing. I appreciate your watching, and I hope that this presentation was very informative. And here are my references.